light, shining bright and clear. Hope is in the air now, spread it far and near. From the mountains to the valleys, every heart can hear a brand new celebration. Let's embrace the cheer. It's a new day for America. Let the banners fly. With unity as our anthem, our dreams will never die. Together we'll rise, holding God's hand. A new dawn is breaking in across this land. Voices from the city, echoes from the plains. Stories of tomorrow flowing through our veins. Dreamers and believers will forge a way ahead in the tapestry of freedom. Every thread is thread. It's a new day for America. Let the banners fly. With unity as our anthem, our dreams will never die. Together we'll rise, holding God's hand. A new dawn is breaking in across this land. No more looking backward, the past is just a guide. With courage in our heart and hope as our pride. We build a brighter future where every voice can sing. In this land of many colors, let freedom ring. It's a new day for America. Let the banners fly. With unity as our anthem, our dreams will never die. Together we'll rise, hold God's hand. A new dawn is breaking in across this land. Here's to tomorrow with dreams take flight. One tapestry of culture, we'll band it down to Friday. It's a new day for America. Don't conquer it great. It's a land of possibilities and love will always reign. Oh, 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 oh.
Texas, and Washington. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. How are we today? Good. During his inaugural address, President Trump promised that America would be a manufacturing nation once again, and liberal pundits mocked him for it. But those critics were proven wrong once again. On the heels of President Trump's Oval Office meeting with Apple CEO Tim Cook last week, Apple just announced its largest ever commitment to American jobs and industry, with plans to spend and invest more than $500 billion in America over the next 4 years. Over the course of the current Trump administration, Apple plans to hire around 20,000 new workers, creating high-paying jobs right here in America. And the investment isn't limited to one specific region of our country. Apple teams and facilities will expand all over our country in Arizona, California, Iowa, Nevada, North Carolina, Michigan, Oregon, Texas, and Washington.
Well, before we go further, didn't we hear Trump say, make a deal, a similar deal? Was it somebody from Korea forgot another $500 billion from a manufacturer? If we have this deal that comes off with Ukraine to get some of that coin back that we put into the war and getting the minerals out of there and in a fair exchange, a fair deal, that's another $500 billion. They have a goal of getting rid of $1 trillion worth of waste, fraud, and abuse. Can you imagine over the next 2 years if any of this stuff, actually, materializes as the plans go? I mean, we're talking about money coming in, reciprocal tariffs, all that kind of stuff. I mean, we could be flush. We could finally see a peace dividend coming back to America. I mean, I think that would be fantastic. Nobody was talking like this. I mean, I didn't see anybody from, the other side talking like this. All they were talking about is transgenderism and identity politics and all kinds of shit that didn't matter to the vast majority of people. And this guy's talking about making deals that'll make America strong economically. I mean, this is the way it's supposed to be. There's no going back. We can't go backwards. And let's continue.
With President Trump in charge, America is open for business. Apple CEO Tim Cook said it best in the company's announcement. We are bullish on the future of American innovation. On top of this incredible Apple announcement, President Trump already announced more than $1 trillion in pledged investments into the United States. And on another important note that the American people entrusted President Trump to fulfill, this administration's efforts to seal the border continue to prove extraordinarily successful.
Okay,
In President Trump's first month back in office alone.
Before we go further, let's go back just a little bit more. I want to hear what you talked about, this $1 trillion. Hold on for a second.
Trump in charge, America is open for business. Apple CEO Tim Cook said it best in the company's announcement. We are bullish on the future of American innovation. On top of this incredible Apple announcement, President Trump already announced more than $1 trillion in pledged investments into the United States.
All right, so let's stop it there. Let's take a look at this chart here. Okay, I mean, they identified $600 billion from Saudi Arabia, another $500 billion from Apple, $14 billion from Nippon Steel, $500 billion from Stargate. Okay, another $20 billion from, I guess, Hussein, whatever the last name is. A total investment so far of $1.6 trillion of investment money coming in. Now, if you couple that with the cost avoidance and the actually capturing the waste, fraud, and abuse that DOGE is uncovering and lowering our economic footprint for how much it costs to run the government, we're talking about over $2.6 trillion right there over the next 2 years. Right? I mean, listen, we're talking some serious business here, right?
And on another important note that the American people entrusted President Trump to fulfill, this administration's efforts to seal the border continue to prove extraordinarily successful. In President Trump's first month back in office alone, illegal border crossings hit lows not seen in decades, down 94% over the past year, while interior arrests are up 134%. And this past Saturday, this is a significant statistic that I wanted to share with all of you. There were only 220 illegal border crossings on Saturday. This is a 15-year low. Think about that in comparison to the amount of illegal border crossings we saw under the previous administration. Fox recently reported that a San Diego migrant shelter is closing its doors after saying they have not received new asylum-seeking families or individuals since January 20th. We all know what happened on January 20th, don't we? And yesterday, New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced that the massive Roosevelt Hotel migrant shelter in Manhattan will shut down in the next few months. We're also seeing a reverse migration effect. There are now verified reports from the Associated Press of migrants abandoning their journey to the United States and heading back home. This is the first time the Border Patrol has received these reports since 2020, during President Trump's first term. The returning migrants claimed in interviews that the new heavy security posture adopted by the Trump administration was a significant reason for their decision to return to the countries of their origin. Overall, the American people continue to overwhelmingly give President Trump very positive remarks. Nearly every one of President Trump's policy initiatives are receiving strong majority support. And I have noted that in every briefing since Inauguration Day. 81% of Americans support deporting illegal migrant criminals from our nation's interior. 76% of Americans support the DOGE-led efforts of a full-scale investigation to find and eliminate fraud and waste in government expenditures. Again, this is from a Harvard-Harris poll, a very legitimate pollster. 76% of Americans support closing the border. 69% of Americans support President Trump's common sense efforts to ban men from women's.
Well, you know, going back to who are the 24% of the people that, you know, don't want to close the border. I mean, to have some control over the border. I mean, it doesn't kind of make any sense, right? Who wants open? Why would 24% of the people want open borders? I mean, who are these people? I mean, it's fair to see that there's some opposition, but I would think that number should be probably in the 85 to 90 percentile.
Sports, as you all know, we celebrated that executive order at the White House a couple of weeks ago. 65% of Americans support the president's efforts to eliminate all preferences by race in the hiring and awarding of government contracts, which is another pledge that DOGE is working hard to fulfill.
Well, here's the one thing that they have to do, and I agree, and I understand that there's a lot of people who are not white who are nervous about when they say no race. We also have to assume that we've come far enough that the natural predilections of man won't revert all the way back into the Stone Ages. And I don't think it will. And that's going to be one of the challenges, or that's going to be one of the things that the blackity blacks and the race baiters, whatever color they are going to be looking at, right? We're going to say, we're going to go a little bit on the buddy system or the I trust you to do the right thing based on merit and qualifications. And so I expect, if you listen to the no-neck, butt-loving guys like Roland Martin, he's saying in 3 or 4 or 5 years, we'll be back in the Stone Ages of nobody black ever getting a job. I don't believe him at all, but he's putting that fear out there to everybody. So that's one thing they're going to be looking at. So you're going to make sure that I don't want to use the word fair, because there's no such thing as really fair. So merit-based means merit-based, and there's got to be common sense put towards it as well. Let's see how it looks.
And 61% of Americans, vast majority, support the president's plan for reciprocal tariffs to ensure that other countries are treating us the way we have always been treated.
Just a good list, by the way.
Despite what many Democrats and media members want you to believe, the Trump agenda is not only necessary, but it is overwhelmingly popular. Why? Because it's driven by common sense. And finally, as you all saw yesterday, a federal judge denied the Associated Press's emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against myself, our Deputy Chief of Staff, Taylor Budowich, and our Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, for our decision to remove the Associated Press from the White House press pool for certain and special events. The judge's ruling upholding our decision to deny the Associated Press such privileged access reinforces the truth. And it reiterates what I said from this podium last week when that suit was filed. Asking the President of the United States questions in limited spaces, such as the Oval Office in Air Force One, is a privilege that unfortunately has only been granted to a few. It is not a legal right for all. The Trump administration has already proven to be the most transparent ever, and this president, the most accessible in history. This is evidenced by President Trump's daily press conferences in the Oval Office, where he takes many questions from the journalists who have the honor and privilege of standing before the beautiful, resolute desk. The president and this entire White House are committed to ensuring the American people continue to receive this same level of historic transparency, access, and visibility. In fact, we want to double down and give even greater access to the American people. We want more outlets and new outlets to have a chance to take part in the press pool, to cover this administration's unprecedented achievements up close, front and center. As you all know, for decades, a group of DC-based journalists, the White House Correspondents Association, has long dictated which journalists get to ask questions of the President of the United States in these most intimate spaces. Not anymore. I am proud to announce that we are going to give the power back to the people who read your papers, who watch your television shows, and who listen to your radio stations. Moving forward, the White House press pool will be determined by the White House press team. Legacy outlets who have participated in the press pool for decades will still be allowed to join, fear not, but we will also be offering the privilege to well-deserving outlets who have never been allowed to share in this awesome responsibility. Just like we added a new media seat in this briefing room, legacy media outlets who have been here for years will still participate in the pool, but new voices are going to be welcomed in as well. As part of these changes, we will continue the rotation amongst the 5 major television networks to ensure the president's remarks are heard far and wide around this world.
All right, so here you go. So she's talking about transparency. She's talking about allowing more access to people to ask questions, more broad people from the internet, people from not just the legacy media, all of these little other places that are not so little anymore, that reach deep down into the American population, other than the 5 major networks or whatever you call them. And not to get your questions asked, to be involved in the information directly, to be able to share more, to both send and receive more information to the American public, is the very opposite of censorship. And the censorship that the Democrats and their far left fascist leanings actually not only mention, but they champion. And I'm gonna just go ahead and cut for a real quick second to a lady who is a champion for censorship. And she says the secret out loud. And she calls that moving forward. So here we go. Here we go with this woman who is in the Congress talking about censorship and how it's a good thing.
Take a bit of umbrage here. I'll speak on behalf of my colleagues. I think I can say we are all willing to work with anyone who's serious about doing the work of censoring the American people and advancing progress.
We're going to let her say it twice.
Look, let me tell you something. I'll take a bit of umbrage here. I'll speak on behalf of my colleagues. I think I can say we are all willing to work with anyone who's serious about doing the work of censoring the American people and advancing progress.
Now, you heard that from the horse's mouth, right? I mean, it sounded idiotic, but she's talking about quashing free speech in order to advance American progress under the totalitarianism of the far crazy left wing of the Democratic Party. You know, I don't even know how horrible that looks, but I would imagine that it's dangerous, and it's a place that none of us really would want to be. So we can't go back, and that's a cautionary tale to the Republicans. You got a little bit of momentum, but you can't let your pride get too far ahead of yourself, because American people are fickle. All right, so we'll get back to that one, but you don't want to lose the bubble, because the midterms are very important. So, and we'll get back to, you don't want hubris to take over, and I can tell you where they could make a mistake.
We will add additional streaming services which reach different audiences than traditional cable and broadcast. This is the ever-changing landscape of the media in the United States today. We will continue to rotate a print pooler who has the great responsibility of quickly transcribing the president's remarks and disseminating them to the rest of the world. And we will add outlets to the print pool rotation who have long been denied the privilege to partake in this experience, but are committed to covering this White House beat. We will continue to rotate a radio pooler and add other radio hosts who have been denied access, especially local radio hosts who serve as the heartbeat of our country. And we will add additional outlets and reporters who are well suited to cover the news of the day and ask substantive questions of the President of the United States, depending on the news he is making on that given day. This administration is shaking up Washington in more ways than one. That's what we were elected to do. As I have said since the first day behind this podium, it's beyond time that the White House press operation reflects the media habits of the American people in 2025, not 1925. A select group of DC-based journalists should no longer have a monopoly over the privilege of press access at the White House. All journalists, outlets, and voices deserve a seat at this highly coveted table. So by deciding which outlets make up the limited press pool on a day-to-day basis, the White House will be restoring power back to the American people who President Trump was elected to serve. So in that note, in our new media seat today, we have Shelby Talcott, who is a White House reporter for Semaphore. In 2022, Semaphore launched as a global digital news platform with the aim of bringing meaningful innovations to the news industry. Today, they have nearly 1 million newsletter subscribers spanning 11 separate editions. With that, Shelby, I will take your questions.
Thanks, Caroline. I've got two for you. One on foreign policy. Over the weekend, the president's special missions envoy, Rick Grenell, was talking about Venezuela, and he said that the president isn't someone who wants regime change. Other administration officials have made clear that they don't see Maduro as the rightful leader. What is this administration's policy on a new government in Venezuela?
I think the president has made his position on Venezuela quite clear. He stands in opposition to the Maduro regime, and Secretary Rubio has spoken on this extensively as well.
And then on DOGE, last night Elon Musk said that a failure to respond a second time will result in termination. Will there be additional rounds of the "what did you do this week" email from DOGE to federal workers? And what's the guidance on the federal workers who've been instructed by their agencies not to reply?
So a couple of things on this. First of all, let's just take a step back and talk about this idea. The president sent out a truth last weekend to Elon Musk saying he loves everything Elon is doing and he wants him to be even more aggressive because DOGE thus far has proven incredibly successful in making our government more efficient. And so Elon and DOGE came up with this idea. Elon has implemented this at his private companies. It has proven successful. And it's a very simple idea when you think about it. All the Office of Personnel Management is asking, all this administration is asking, President Trump is asking, is for federal workers who live off of the American taxpayers' dime to send 5 bullet points of what they have done in the previous week.
Well, here's the thing. This is where you guys are standing on the edge of hubris, okay? You got to understand that even though I think the request of sending, 5 bullet points on what you did last week for getting paid is something simple. Everybody should be gainfully employed, and you should be working on something, whether it's reading a document, depending scrutinizing a document for defects and things of that nature, or not just misspelling, but misinterpretation of requirements and things of that nature. Some important things depending on what you're working for. Like I worked on weapon systems. We had to look at certain documents for development and design and requirements and things of that nature. Those kind of reviews were tedious, and you had to make sure they were everything was right, and you had to document your comments, and it was time consuming because some of these things were pretty extensive. So those things are easy to write up, but that's not the issue. In the government, there's really, as crazy as it sounds, for much people don't like the waste in the way the government is structured. It is very bureaucratic, and it is a hierarchical system. So when you see something coming from a guy, whether it's DOGE or the president, like for example, as a general employee like me, if I ever sent the president an email directly, there will be like 15 people between me and the president telling me that means you're fired, pretty much, if it even got to him. So when you see a message coming from a guy who is so many levels above your organization as you sitting down on a desk, it's going to cause confusion. We could ignore the confusion, but in the turbulence that's being created by the DOGE team of ferreting out, good employees from bad ones, waste, fraud, abuse, and of course, the overpopulation of the workforce. Something like this it's not just confusing. It's disconcerting, and you gotta have some deference for the fact that you guys are stirring the pot. You're firing for effect. I can dig it, but some of the whining you're going to get out of the workforce is not unmerited. It really isn't. Even though the reply is not a big thing, we know that that DOGE can't fire anybody, and your responses still have to go through the chain of command. But on the email list, it said send it to back to OPM, if I believe. And nobody in the government with their chain of command is used to sending email directly from their desk to OPM. Other than if it was a personnel management thing directly had to do with their the management of their personnel files and things of that nature. So it was a very unusual request in terms of the chain of command, even if what you were asking for them to do was simple. So don't get it twisted, Karoline. I'm all for what we want to do in the future, but you can blow it. Right? You got to get past the midterms. You can't blow it. So this is a little bit of hubris. I hope you guys learn a little bit. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourselves where the people who voted for you start to say, wait a minute, forget. I mean, they always have recency bias, a little bit of upset. They could forget that we were going to hell under the last administration. And you don't want them to think somehow that might be better than what you guys have planned for us in the future, because what the future is bright, but don't blow.
That is all we are asking for. And so the Office of Personnel and Management sent out additional guidance last night. Those responses should be directed to agency leadership, and the president defers to his cabinet secretaries, who he's obviously entrusted to pursue the guidance relative to their specific workforce. And for some of the agencies that you've seen who have said, please don't send these emails, it's in their best interest for that specific agency, and the president supports that. And let me be very clear. The president and Elon his entire cabinet are working as one unified team, and they are implementing these very common sense solutions. You're welcome. Jackie.
One follow-up on that question. So about the deadline, Alina Habba said that you have until tonight. Elon Musk said a failure to respond a second time would result in termination. So is that a real deadline? Should federal workers be looking to that guidance, or should they be looking to the agency heads? Like, what is the actual deadline?
So again, the agency heads will determine the best practices for their employees at their specific agencies. Again, this was an idea that Elon come up with. DOGE worked with OPM to actually implement the idea, and the secretaries are responsible for their specific workforce. And this is true of the hirings and the firings that have taken place. And we advise federal workers, unless your agency has dictated you not to respond to this email. In fact, I can announce that we've had more than 1 million workers who have chosen to participate in this very simple task of, again, sending 5 bullet points to your direct supervisor or manager, CCing OPM. I actually participated in myself. It took me about a minute and a half to think of 5 things I did last week. I do 5 things in about 10 minutes, and all federal workers should be working at the same pace that President Trump is working and moving. We have a country to save, and we want this federal government to be responsive to the needs of the American people who reelected this president to have historic, massive reform. And that's what the intention of this idea is.
Can you clarify one thing, though? Because Elon Musk also said that a reason they wanted this 5 things email was just to see if people are actually alive. Saying that there are some federal workers who might not even be alive. So meantime, NBC is reporting that these responses are going to go into an AI generator to evaluate whether these jobs are necessary. So is it just to see if people are actually working, or is it an effort to maybe cut some of those jobs?
I have not seen that NBC News report, and I haven't heard that from DOGE or from Elon himself. Again, this is to ensure that federal workers are not ripping off American taxpayers, that they are showing up to the office, and that they are doing their jobs. That's what the American people expect, and it's a very simple task to complete. I did it myself, and I was more than happy to do it because I'm very grateful that I am serving the American people on the American taxpayers' dime.
I can see I was surprised it wasn't MSDNC doing it, but I can see them saying, and I heard some of this from the guys on the floor who are still working in the federal government. They said, yeah, they just want to take our responses. They're going to funnel it through AI and make a determination on whether what you're doing is legitimate enough for the position you have. I said, man, they could probably do that, but I don't think they set it up where all the data will be available for your AI machine, the AI generator, to be able to parse out that individual A working in the Bureau of Record and Standards, and engineer B working in a research and development facility, how they could measure, the work that the Bureau guy did as opposed to the work that the engineer did, rate them towards one and another and say, this one is more important than this one. So the bureau guy goes, or the engineer goes, because the guy in the bureau, is handling some, some information that, we must have. I mean, there's probably possibilities to do those kind of checks and balances, but they don't have that program up and running yet. Especially nobody at NBC knows. That's for sure. So I just think that this request is a fire for effect thing to shake up the workforce, to say, hey, listen, no matter where you sit, we're coming, and every piece and every corner of the federal government is under scrutiny, and we just want you to know that. That's what I think this is really for. So is that fair? Well, fair is not it's not in question here. It doesn't matter whether it's fair or not. It's what's happening.
DOGE should hire a spokesperson just so that Elon Musk doesn't put out tweets that then confuse federal workers.
Are my press briefings not good enough for you, Jackie? John.
Carolyn, thank you. In the ruling by Judge McFadden yesterday, who dismissed the lawsuit that AP brought against yourself and your team members here, President Trump, in there he said, why not just do away with the entire White House Correspondents Association along with it, because essentially they have no authority. They just usurped it. What is your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, John, it's great to see you. And you are one of those individuals who has you're on a streaming platform that hundreds of thousands of people tune into every day. So it's great to see you in the briefing room. I did address that actually in my opening remarks by announcing that the White House press team in this administration will determine who gets to enjoy the very privileged and limited access in spaces such as Air Force One and the Oval Office. There are, as you know, look at this room, hundreds of journalists who show up to this building every single day and are not granted that luxury of flying on Air Force One and asking the President of the United States questions. And so we want to ensure, again, everyone has a seat at that highly coveted table. But alas, the legacy media outlets who have been doing this for quite some time and have invested resources into covering the White House, their spots will remain, just like they have in this briefing room as well. Sure. Steve.
Could you give us an update on the negotiations around the Ukraine minerals deal, and when is President Zelensky going to come visit?
So the president talked at length about this yesterday, the critical minerals deal with President Macron. And in the more than hour-long press conference he gave all of you in the Oval Office himself, there hasn't been significant updates since the president's remarks last night, but I will just reiterate his position. It's critical that this deal is signed. He expects President Zelensky to sign a deal. This is to recoup American tax dollars that have been funding Ukraine's national defense. And it's also great for the Ukrainian people who have been put through hell because of this war. And it will create a lasting economic partnership as Ukraine will need to rebuild their country because of this brutal war.
And just to follow, is Steve Witkoff delayed his trip to the Middle East so he can concentrate on this minerals deal?
I don't want to comment on Mr. Witkoff's travel plans or read anything out just for obvious reasons. But he, remains very much working. That man is working around the clock to secure this deal with Russia and Ukraine alongside Secretary Rubio and Secretary Bessent, General Keith Kellogg. He's also working very hard to secure a peace deal in the Middle East as well. So God bless him. And he's working alongside the president every single day. Sure.
Thanks, Karoline. The president's executive order creating DOGE called for the naming of a DOGE administrator. Who is the DOGE administrator?
So the president tasked Elon Musk to oversee the DOGE effort. There are career officials and there are political appointees who are helping run DOGE on a day-to-day basis. There are also individuals who have onboarded as political appointees at every agency across the board to work alongside President Trump's cabinet to find and identify waste, fraud, and abuse. And they are working on that effort every day.
So is Elon
Reagan.
Musk the administrator?
Reagan.
Thanks, Caroline. I have two for you today, one on the border wall and one on the DHS investigation.
Sure.
First on the border wall construction has restarted in Texas and California under contracts awarded under Trump's first term. Is the president looking to secure new contracts, and how is he defining success in terms of border wall construction this administration?
The border wall is a signature promise of President Trump's campaign. He talked about it way back in 2015 and 2016, and people laughed at him for bringing up this idea. It's proven to be not only an idea that he delivered on in his first term and continues to deliver on in his second term, but it's also proven to be highly effective. In fact, we know where there were parts of President Trump's border wall built and standing under the previous administration, illegal border crossings dropped 87% where there was a border wall. So the wall is an incredible deterrent factor for illegal migrant caravans. The president is committed to the continuation of the construction of the wall. And, you know, the previous administration actually sold off the resources that the Trump administration secured to build the wall. And that's an egregious misuse of the American taxpayers' money. They just let those resources rot on the southern border. They actually sold them for pennies on the dollar. So this administration, DHS and ICE and Customs and Border Patrol and Tom Homan and all of the great people you know who are working on this effort are committed to continuing the construction of President Trump's border wall.
One of the biggest conspiracy theories that is going, and nobody really, I mean, we're talking about it, but we're talking around it. There's got to be a tremendous investigation around the fact that Biden and Harris purposely circumvented the immigration process to allow tens of millions of people into our, even if they were all good people, okay? You know, even if they were all good, they circumvented a system that we had in place. If you go through and check out what it takes to become a legal, naturalized citizen in the United States, there are 32 million people in general, as of 2018, that's a number I looked at, to apply legally for citizenship, right? And there's like tremendous amount of steps to go through. The first thing is you got to get a green card to establish permanent residency here in the United States. And out of the 32 million people who applied, they only granted 1 million 1 million green cards. And when you establish residency, you have to be here for like maybe 3 to 5 years before you could go to the next steps. So when you have 32 million people trying to apply for something where only 3% of the folks can actually get through legally, you create a black market. You create a black market. You know, when the demand is that much higher than the supply, you create a black market. And I have I'm gonna do a stream on what I think should be part of the solution to that. And there's a reason why we only let 1 million people in legally. But I think that number is probably low, especially on how long it takes to naturalize those people. We could probably handle a little bit more. But one of the biggest things about immigration, a lot of people don't talk about, that the new people who come here have to be assimilated. You know, just take a look at a little bit of Star Trek, you know, the Borg, you know, you will be assimilated. If a person comes from a different country here, they got to be assimilated to the American culture, the American ideals, the American way of life. And, you know, if you have 20 to 30 or 40 million people in a one fell swoop over a 4-year period, they're not getting assimilated. They start to change the way we live, right? Because that's a lot of people. Even with just 1 million people, you have to, get them to acclimate it into how to live in this particular country. And that's the big deal. That's why we can't be flooded. Now, when we start talking about crime and criminals and all that other kind of stuff, which exacerbates a bad situation to begin with. But part of these steps in becoming a naturalized citizen, you also got to learn English, right? It doesn't have to become your first language, but it's on the books. You need to learn English. You know, you need to be able to speak our language. And there's a whole host of other shit. You got to have a job, you get a social security number, you got to do American kind of things. You also have to, if you're a man, you also have to be willing to go to war. Should be the same thing for women. They should both have to sign up for selective service. Even American women should sign up for selective service. Doesn't mean you're going to go on the front line, but they should be. If you want to be president, you should at least do that too. But that's a whole nother story. So all I'm just trying to say is I understand now a little bit better on why so many people want to come here, because they do, just in general, because the American dream is still alive compared to where they live. But by definition, America has a strong, small window of opportunity every year for people to get that green card to establish residency, and it creates a black market. And the black market is what you saw over the last 4 years. It gives rise to the cartels and the mules and the people who want to smuggle people in, because it becomes quite lucrative. So if you withhold something people want, marijuana, drugs, and even services, certain things that you can't get, but only a limited of people can get, you create a gray and a black market. And that's what we just saw. That's what we have. So I think I don't want to deflect too much from what's going on, but therein lies the rub. Therein lies our good intentions of only letting a few people in towards legal naturalization has created a black market, because we underestimate the power of maybe we don't at those high levels, but there's an underestimation, I would say, for lack of a better word, of the tremendous demand for people who want to come here. So there's a black market being created. Maybe that's obvious, but you know what? It's just my recent revelation on how that works. All right, so let's continue.
Investigation into people who might be leaking within the administration. Will the White House release the names of the individuals that DHS Secretary Noem said were caught leaking details of the ICE raid? And can you share how many leakers have been caught so far and what agency they were a part of?
I would defer you to DHS on the leakers that they have identified, but I know the president in this White House commend Secretary Noem for launching an internal investigation to identify those leakers, because it's unacceptable for career bureaucrats who are standing in the way of the will of the American people and enacting President Trump's agenda. If they don't want to adhere to the will of the 77 million Americans who reelected President Trump, then they should go find another job. And if they continue to leak information, especially information that is critical to protecting Border Patrol agents and ICE agents who are out there doing jobs that not many people are willing to do, putting their lives on the line to protect our national security, then those individuals absolutely should be fired. And this administration is committed to finding them.
Well, listen, they not only should be fired, they should stand trial and they should go to jail if they're guilty. You can't even, just firing them is not good enough. Absolutely breaking the law. They're actually breaking the law. They're aiding and abetting criminal activities. So I wouldn't just fire them and let them go home and find another job. These guys are enemy of the state. If you're working for the FBI or you're working for ICE or any other federal organization, it doesn't matter what your political leanings are. Your allegiances to the job. Like for me, I've been a Democrat my whole life, but I worked in the Department of Defense, and we had to put out systems into the field that were systems of pretty much mass destruction. It didn't matter whether we were Republicans or Democrats, right? The only thing that mattered at those tables on those release boards was whether the systems were working properly and they were safe, so the soldiers had the best chance to win. And that was the only consideration. We couldn't have any political talk around that table when we were in the release boards. Anytime anybody tried to say anything about the political leanings, when I was sitting at the chair, that shit was squashed in a second. You give a shit whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It was all about the safety of the soldiers at that time and the best equipment to get put in the field. That's all that mattered. So if you're sitting in the FBI seat, I don't care if you're behind a computer screen, I don't care if you're on a raid, your political proclivities are your own. You got to do your goddamn job. And if you're telling criminals and even your grandmother who's illegal, these guys are coming, you're breaking the law. And if you get caught, you should go to jail. It's as simple as that. That's why Governor Hochul or what AOC is doing and every other one of these blue state people who would rather help an illegal immigrant that they love by allowing murderers, killers, thieves, rapists, and all the kind of worst gang members to stay here just so they could protect grandma. These people should get kicked out of office. They should be impeached. They should go to jail. There should be all these bad shit should happen to those. They're traitors. I think it's treason. That's what I think.
Sure.
Karoline, two questions for you. One related to Guantanamo Bay, the other to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I wanted to get your response to some Washington Post reporting of the migrants who stayed over at Guantanamo Bay for the last 2 weeks. They told the Post they were rarely let outside. They were shackled and placed in what they described as cages and alleged that they were not treated as human beings. Does the White House have any response to those conditions?
At Guantanamo Bay? It's a promise the president campaigned on, that if you invade our nation's borders, if you break our country's laws, and if then you further commit heinous, brutal crimes in the interior of our country, like raping and murdering innocent, law-abiding women and girls, and committing heinous acts of violence, then you are going to be deported from this country, and you may be held at Guantanamo Bay. These are criminals we are talking about. Don't forget that. Sure.
You know what? See, when I first heard this, and I was gonna say, just asking a question, sometimes you ask a question that puts you in the line of fire. That's what that lady did. I'm not so sure she has any issue with what Karoline just said. But there's a whole bunch of bleeding heart assholes out there, and that's what I'm gonna call them, who want to have some kind of sympathy for the worst killers and murderers out there. And so they're in Guantanamo Bay and they don't have HBO and 3 steak dinners a day and conjugal visits and shit like that. And she just wanted to remind this lady, these are the worst of the worst. We shouldn't be sitting down here, crying for me, Argentina, for those people. Now, there's a certain limit to being inhumane, but, whether we're at that limit or not, shouldn't be something that you go to bed worrying about for those kind of guys, because if they were in your house, they're not going to be giving you or your family any deference for all the things they might do to your loved ones. So we got to stop the bullshit.
So U.S. consumer confidence fell this month the most since August of 2021. What is your message for Americans who are concerned about the impact of things such as tariffs on prices?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for that question. It's obviously an important one. The president campaigned on reigniting the Trump economy and fixing the mess that was created by the previous administration. We know they created an economic and an inflation nightmare for the American people. And I'm not going to stand up here and lie to you like my predecessor did about the state of our economy. We understand there are people that are hurting, and this administration is wholeheartedly committed to ensuring that those individuals see relief and price reductions and tax cuts, and in less regulations that are burdensome on their household and their businesses. And the president and this entire administration are focused on that every day. I can go through the very long list of economic actions this president has taken. I know you work for Bloomberg, so I'm sure you're well aware of them, but I can assure the American people that the president is very much focused on bringing down the cost of living crisis in this country that was created by the previous administration.
Follow up.
Sure.
Is the president planning on whipping any votes for support for the House budget vote? And if so, to whom is he making calls?
I'm not aware of any calls that he has made. I did talk to the president about his position on this just before coming down here. And he said that he's made it very clear to the Hill what his priorities for a budget are. He said it to the Speaker of the House. He said it to Leader Thune. The Senate and the House know what President Trump wants and know what the American people want. And so he expects Congress to get it done. He's looking at the proposal from the House. He will also be looking at the proposal that I believe the Senate is drafting up as well. Sure.
Thank you, Karoline. I have 2 questions. Does the United States,
Well, why don't you identify your question and I'll come back to you. Sure, go ahead.
So, what guarantee that Israel will withdraw from Lebanon soil after 2 weeks, as the ceasefire terms indicates?
I'm not sure about the guarantee that you're referring to. I can tell you that this administration remains very much engaged. We know the deadline for the phase 1 ceasefire is imminent. So Steve Witkoff, whom I mentioned earlier, and the president's administration and his team and the president himself remain very much engaged. We want to see the ceasefire continue, and the president has made it very clear he wants to see all of the hostages who have been held in captivity in Gaza returned home. Jeff.
Karoline, I was wondering if Elon Musk going to attend the president's first cabinet meeting tomorrow?
He is, as a matter of fact. I spoke to the president about that before coming down here as well. And Elon, considering he is working alongside the president and our cabinet secretaries, this entire administration will be in attendance tomorrow just to talk about DOGE's efforts and how all of the cabinet secretaries are identifying waste, fraud, and abuse at their respective agencies. We look forward to the meeting tomorrow, and I think you'll be hearing from the president and his cabinet where they're on campus tomorrow. I hope you guys are excited.
So some of those cabinet members were caught off guard by the email.
Nobody was caught off guard.
A few departments said they were caught off guard. The FBI was, the DOJ was.
Did anonymous sources say that, or did the cabinet secretary say that?
The cabinet secretaries and others have said that they were not aware that this was happening. So I'm wondering, will there be a give and take tomorrow at the cabinet meeting? Is Elon Musk or the president open to any type of dialogue about who is actually in charge of the chain of command of these workers?
I would reject the premise of your question, Jeff. The cabinet secretaries have not said that. I know anonymous sources, probably career bureaucrats, have leaked that to many of you in this room. But as I said at the beginning of this press conference, everybody is working as one team, and the president respects the decisions of his cabinet secretaries to tell their staff, not to respond to that email because they did so out of interests of national security, and they don't want to obviously risk confidential information. It's pretty common sense. Dasha.
Musk has obviously been doing a lot of work. He's been working every day and a lot of the time weekends. He is designated as a special government employee, which means that he can only work 130 days per year. Is the White House expecting him to limit his work to 130 days, or are you going to work around those rules? Do you want to see him extend beyond the 130
So today is February 25th. So I think we've been here about 35 days roughly. So ask me in another 100 days.
That was such a great answer. Just, I don't want to say it was a stupid question, but they're down to nitpicking shit that doesn't matter in order to ask some of their, left-leaning questions. Even the guy who tried to characterize things being out of control with that email, I didn't like them sending out that email, so let me get that straight, right? I think there's a little bit of hubris in that email, and I think they could be going down a path of making a mistake. So they got to be careful with being overconfident with the mandate that they have. And because for me, the most frightening thing that the Republicans can do now is let those freaks on the far left get back into power. With the things that they want to do to this country, I don't think people are frightened enough of how those people are thinking. Not only for old farts like me, forget about that, but for children. These people want to do some of the most crazy and heinous things to children, and not to mention the unborn. So let's not get too ahead of ourselves.
Daniel.
Karoline, thank you. You opened up with a major announcement from Apple. $500 billion, 20,000 jobs, doubling its advanced manufacturing fund.
Yeah.
What does that signal that such a global brand would make what it called its largest ever spend commitment just a month into President Trump's second term? What does that signal about his economic vision for the country?
President Trump is a deal maker, and he has restored confidence in business leaders around this entire world. Apple is one of the largest companies on the face of the planet. They employ hundreds of thousands of Americans, but the president wants to see more Americans employed, more investments here in the United States of America. And this is another fulfillment of the president's campaign promises. I recall President Trump at his rallies on the campaign telling the world that if and when I am elected, America is going to be back, and we want your investments to be driven onshore. We want you to hire American workers, and you will have the lowest regulatory burden, the lowest tax cuts, and the president has already proven he's committed to slashing regulation. He's counting on Congress to implement those tax cuts. And so people are encouraged by the president's, again, as Tim Cook called it, they're bullish about American innovation because of the leadership of this president. And it's a stark contrast to the leadership of the previous administration, Joe Biden, who I don't think spent any time trying to recruit any investments or jobs here at home. Mary.
We're hearing from some Republicans who are voicing concerns about how these cuts are being carried out. Congressman McCormick, a Republican from Georgia, tells us he's worried it's too rapid for real people to adapt to. And he says he's concerned that it could come off as discompassionate, in his words, that it could risk undercutting the strong message that he feels you're trying to send about the need to cut government waste.
Well, I think that was one comment from one senator. And I think, as I cited in my opening remarks in the poll, the most important people are the American people. And 77% of Americans at home support a full investigation into the waste, fraud, and abuse that the federal government has been spending their tax dollars on. So that's the people the president cares about most. And that's why we're fulfilling this pledge. And again, it should come as no secret to anybody. The president campaigned on doing this.
Yeah, Caroline, you're correct. You're right. But that question goes to a little bit about style, not necessarily speed. We need to speed because time is of the essence. 2 years to the midterms is a very, very short period of time. So in order for you to solidify certain things that need to get done, you can't be bullshitting. I agree. But the style of which things are doing, that you're doing, has to always have some kind of checks and balances, even if it's internally. That email this weekend to the workforce was unnecessary. It really was. I mean, it was. It was a fire for effect event, which you really can't argue. You can't say, fire for effect, but you just can't lose sight that hubris is an easy thing that you could fall into. And, and people who usually were used to voting against their own interests will start to vote on their feelings if they get hurt too much. And even if you're doing the right thing, right? So it's a, the mandate ain't like forever. You know what I'm saying? There's been mandates out there before and people have lost them. So we got to be careful. So the question, the senator, the senator's question was not necessarily a bad one. If you miss the essence of what he's saying, you can be heading down the wrong waters, even though you are correct in your answer. It's just my feelings for it. I'm not saying slow down, but I'm saying along with the speed, there should be like some comfortable seats on that train that's moving real fast. Maybe a few seatbelts will be okay.
The president yesterday said if you don't respond to this email, you will be fired or semi-fired. What does he mean by that?
Again, I've been asked to answer this question 3 times now. It is semi-fired, but it's in the memo. The president again has entrusted his cabinet secretaries to oversee their workforce. That's why he nominated them to be cabinet secretaries. And so federal workers can be directed to their agency leadership. Sure.
Great, thanks, Caroline. I wanted to ask about a federal judge yesterday was saying that they didn't know who the DOGE administrator was and was asking the lawyer for the administration who it was, and the lawyer responded, "I don't know the answer to that. Can you tell us who the administrator of DOGE is?"
Again, I've been asked to answer this question. Elon Musk is overseeing DOGE. No, Elon Musk is a special government employee, which I've also been asked and have answered that question as well. There are career officials at DOGE. There are political appointees at DOGE. I'm not going to reveal the name of that individual from this podium. I'm happy to follow up and provide that to you. But we've been incredibly transparent about the way that DOGE is working. John. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Since your last briefing, there have been some personnel moves that have been announced by the president, and I wanted to ask you about them. One was the president replacing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown Jr. What was the reason for the president naming a replacement for General Brown? And then I'll follow up with another personnel announcement that's been made over the last few days.
He thinks he's doing a bad job. and it's time for a shakeup at the Pentagon. They failed 7 audits in a row. The trust in our United States military amongst the war fighters is low. The president is shaking up the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, of course, with Secretary Hegseth leading, and he has the right to do that. It's actually quite common from administration to administration to do such a thing.
The president, when he swore him in as the chief of staff for the Air Force, called him a great man and a great gentleman. Does he distance himself from the remarks that he made back in August of 2020?
I think replacing him speaks for itself.
James.
James.
One other one, if I'm sorry, thank you. On the FBI, the president also announced a new deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino. From what has been reported, and maybe this is not accurate reporting, you can tell me, the FBI director, Kash Patel, informed Republican senators that it would be an individual named as the deputy who was a special agent currently at the FBI. And of course, Mr. Bongino is not. What was the reason for naming Mr. Bongino to this position? And was Mr. Patel not correct in making that assurance to those senators?
I'm not sure if anybody in this room has listened to Mr. Bongino when he talks about the past corruption at the FBI, when he talks about his experience serving for the United States Secret Service. This is a man who loves his country and who has honorably served our country in ways that many people have not. He understands the depth of the corruption at these institutions, which the American people reelected President Trump to shake up. And I think it's quite despicable to see many networks in this room who have had chyrons on their television screens labeling Mr. Bongino as a far-right podcaster. He is not. He is a former law enforcement agent. He is a former Secret Service agent who put his life on the line to protect this country. And that is why the President of the United States has entrusted him for this important role. He's also an outsider to this Washington swamp. And we often see that when outsiders are appointed to such coveted positions, a lot of people in this city get very, very nervous. And they should be, because Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Attorney General Bondi are focused on rooting out the corruption at these agencies and ending the weaponization of government once and for all.
Before she goes on, let me just say a little bit about General Brown that was just replaced. A lot of people keep missing this fact. And maybe it's a little known fact. But Donald Trump actually appointed him. This is the folks who cry racism about everything. Donald Trump actually appointed the general that he just replaced to his first high-ranking position. He's been in the government for 40 years. Donald Trump put him in, a high branch in an armed services as a 4-star general in a different position. It was Biden who made him the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But it wasn't like, Trump thought he wasn't a worthy general. You know what I'm saying? So he did serve under the Trump administration. One of the big things is she was a little terse in the way she said he wasn't doing a good job. But his ideology fit more of what Biden wanted and the far left liberals. He was talking about identity politics. Under his watch, they failed those audits, but they also transformed the armed services into this transgenderism thing where they have men in dresses trying to command our troops and all that kind of shit. So when Trump comes in, he didn't want that kind of ideology as a top dog to have that kind of ideology. That makes sense to me. If I'm a GM coming in to play football, I want my own head coach who understands the kind of plays I want to call. I want my own head coach, and I want my own kind of quarterback, right? If I want to have a play option offense, I'm not going to have a stand-up statue quarterback. You know what I'm saying? So listen, these things are natural. That general is not going to be hurting. They didn't fire him. They just took him out of that position. He'll probably retire. He's going to be sitting on somebody's board and making $1 million a year, sitting on one of these big Fortune 500 boards. And he's going to live out the rest of his life in bliss as a decorated Army soldier. And so he's going to be just fine. There ain't no doubt about that. Anyway, so that goes for the race baiters out there that think that something happened. You know what? Just because you're black doesn't mean you can't get replaced. We got to stop that. We got to get past that. I mean, it's just part of life. And the only other thing is, man, I can't imagine how many white people are getting let go by Trump and DOGE compared to any other race out there. There's probably no comparison in terms of numbers.
I'd like to end with something. As you all know, you know what, James? I'm feeling generous. Go ahead.
I will take it. Thank you, Karoline.
Sure.
I wanted to ask
Don't make
about-
me regret this.
I wanted to ask about the Macron visit and the Russia-Ukraine talks in general.
Sure.
It's pretty clear to my eye that President Macron was performing a kind of delicate dance, lavishing praise on the president while seeking in his own remarks to try to bind President Trump to positions and even specific language that the president has not committed to heretofore. One of the most bracing comments from President Macron was when he said that the deal that President Trump is negotiating with the Russians must not be, quote, a surrender for Ukraine. All of the public points that we have heard from President Trump, from Secretary Hegseth, and from other administration officials talking about these negotiations have averred to, quite openly, to concessions from the Ukrainians that will have to be made. The minerals deal, the abandonment of their NATO ambitions, and other elements. So far, we have not heard any administration official suggest a single concession that the Russians should be prepared to make. And so I wonder if you could assure us, at a minimum, that this negotiation process will not be as one-sided as the Europeans seem to think it is, that in fact, President Putin will also be made to engage in some concessions to reach this deal.
Well, I think the president knows how to make a deal better than anyone who has ever assumed the office of the American presidency. And in order to make a deal, you have to bring both sides to the table. And typically, when you make a good deal, both sides leave that table a little bit unhappy. I'm not going to outline the concessions that the president and his team are engaged in discussing. These are obviously ongoing negotiations, and it would be unwise of me to impede them from this podium. But the president has made significant improvements in ending this conflict. He is committed to seeing an end to the war. He wants to see the bloodshed and the killing stopped. He wants to stop seeing young men being killed and slaughtered. This has been going on for far too long. The president inherited this mess because of the incompetence of the previous administration, and he's committed to fixing it. And he's made, some of those concessions clear, but I'm not going to get ahead of him on additional ones. But he is wholeheartedly committed to striking a peace deal in Russia and Ukraine, also in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
All right. So listen, that's the last word she's going to say, but I'm going to let her go play out because she's going to leave. I think sometimes our media could be, I guess you got to ask the questions you have to ask, but it just seems a little kind of disingenuous, right? Who gives a shit whether Russia has to concede something to be? There's no equivalency here. There's none. Not really, right? Because Ukraine will never be part of NATO because that is a non-starter for the Russians. And, even Zelensky tried to say, well, I'll step down if we get into NATO. No, Zelensky, you might still have to step down, but you're not going to. You just take a few of the $1 billion you took from us and go live in the south of France somewhere. And that's going to be what's going to happen. But the truth of the matter is, there is no way that you can go to NATO and we're going to give you NATO a status, because that's the reason why you're at war right now. The killing just has to stop. And President Trump, no matter how you think about him, no matter what kind of derangement syndrome, Zelensky is not going to get equal deal from Russia. He's not. He might have to stand down. And we're offering him a chance to partner with them in their mineral production, rebuild those factories, get them back up to peak efficiency so we could benefit his place, or his country can get those dollars rolling again so they can help rebuild. And the one concession I think they will get is that I would tax a little bit of money out of Russia and say, even though you have enough dead men and all that, your physical infrastructure hasn't been as damaged as much as the Ukraine. You need to fork over $200 million or $1 billion to be a part of that rebuild. Just give it to us, Americans. We'll trust us with the money. We'll make sure it goes to the right place. I'm saying trust us, but whatever way you can do it, so your money goes to help rebuilding a little bit of the infrastructure that you destroyed. And that's probably going to be the only concession. And as far as the concession, that you will not start any more wars. They may get back some territory, maybe, but they're not going to get back Crimea. That's not going back. You know, so Zelensky is not going to get the best thing. The best thing for him, the win for Zelensky, is to stop having his people die. That's the thing he's getting out of it. Stop having your young men and your old men and all of your men dying at the battle for your ideology. That's what you get back, you bastard. That's what we're talking about. You know, and Americans, we're fed up with spending our money on the bloodshed over in your country. So it's just over, man. As simple as that. Sometimes you just got to kick the king down and just say checkmate and get what you can and get the hell out. So that's where we are. You know, that's it. It's just got to stop, man. We as Americans cannot get to, you know, investing the peace dividend on our own country if we're continuously talking about death and destruction around the world. It's just crazy. At some point, it's got to stop. It just has to stop.
Guys, good to see you. We'll see you later.
All right, so that concludes that. So I appreciate anybody. If you were here, please hit the like button on the way out. Do me a favor and do that. And listen, every time I get a chance, I'm going to do my political reactions live, because I like these press conferences. There might be some other things I do this for, but this is you know, her press conferences. You know, I never went into press conferences, especially that last lady. Forget about it. I didn't never want to react to any of the hell she had to say. It was always like idiocy up there. But but there's a lot of good things going on in this administration. They gotta be, like I said, final thoughts. They gotta be careful about letting hubris get in there and blowing the goodwill that they have. But they got the stats, they got the receipts. You know, this thing is what American people want. And it's time to be on the right side of history, not like the governor of Maine, right? She's on the 10% side of history, you know, having big burly men beat up girls in female sports. And somehow you're going to come out as a champion over that. It's the stupidest shit in the whole world. And whenever she's up for a re-election, they got to vote her stinking ass out of office. Anyway, our pain, marriage, politics, and sports, over and out.